We're back on air.
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Once Upon a Time in the Ashes. It's the podcast that celebrates the English and Australian cricketers who played in only one Ashes test. We're currently feasting on the 1985 series in England. Arnie Sidebottom, who we featured last time around, played in the third test at Trent Bridge, but injury ruled him out of the fourth at Old Trafford. The selectors turned to Leicestershire's Jonathan Agnew with a six-match series locked at 1-1. You might remember that Jonathan played a role in episode 9 of this podcast, which featured the remarkable tale of the Vietnam War veteran, Tony Dell.
A friend of mine who's a scorer for the MCC got me an interview with Jonathan Agnew on BBC Test Match Special. Greg heard the interview and decided that it was a good enough story for him to write a book.
The Greg was Greg Millam. The book was And Bring the Darkness Home, inspired by that conversation between Tony Dell and Aggers. It was released in 2021. But today we're going to focus on the playing career of English Test cricketer 508. You might know him better as the voice of BBC Cricket, Mr. Jonathan Agnew. Jonathan Agnew was a right-arm fast bowler for Leicestershire in England. He took 666 first-class wickets at 29, taking 5 in an innings 37 times and 10 in a match on 6 occasions. He played 3 tests and 3 ODIs for England, including his 1 Ashes test in 1985. Jonathan, welcome to Once Upon a Time in the Ashes.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Let's start with just a general question. What are your first memories of Ashes cricket?
My first memory was of Bob Massey, actually, at Lord's. 72, was it, I think, from memory? And just the way that he swung the ball, the unplayable balls, really, that he produced, and the way he ran through England with bowling almost sort of impossible deliveries, really, bowling right-handed batsmen from round the wicket with in-swingers and you know, vice versa with the left-handers. I just thought it was absolutely incredible. And I was just getting into cricket. I was 12 at the time. So it was quite a sort of influential time for me personally. And my dad still wanted me to be an off-spinner and I wanted to be a fast bowler. And I just watched Bob and, of course, Dennis Lillee at the other end and was just struck by it, really, and by Ian Chappell. Rob Marsh, these characters, these Australian characters who are obviously quite larger than life and, I don't know, deemed as being the bad guys. You know, you wanted to get up and get stuck into the Aussies. But, of course, they've all become really good friends. It's what's bizarre about my life, really. You know, Ian, I've spoken to him 4 or 5 times while I've been here in Australia, and I'll see him next week. Bob Massey, I've actually handled those balls in his cabinet at home in Perth. You know, I've actually touched them, held them, you know. And so, and Dennis, mate, I mean, it's just weird how it's all come round. And I can assure you that although at the time we were sort of encouraged to think they were big and bad and brutal and horrible, and so they are all such really nice blokes. And I'll be very lucky to be friends with them.
So, yeah, I mean, it must have been surreal, you know, listening to TMS on the radio when you're growing up as well. And then decades later, it's your voice coming out of the radio.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to Test Match Special as a kid because my dad was, and I think that's still the way with lots of people listening to Test Match Special, lots of kids, you know, I think they get there through their parents listening in the car, or in my case, you know, Dad doing the harvest, and he'd always carry his radio around and he was sort of chuckling, you know, but it was the sound of the voice and the crowd. The John Arlott and Brian Johnston, particularly distinctive for me in those days, Alan McGilvray, the Australian. And although I didn't really, you know, I had no idea I was going to be doing this. So I just sat and just listened to it a bit. I remember we had a little duck pond at home and there was a bench. And I remember going down there and sitting and listening to the cricket for a while with a little transistor radio and being sort of transported to wherever it was. But because I then took up playing professionally from 16, I never really listened much to Test Match Special because we were playing. So I never really heard it very much until suddenly I was actually on it. And I think that was a good thing in a way because I didn't really have much in the way of nerves or anxiety or feel any pressure or tension with the position because I didn't really appreciate what it was at the time.
Yeah.
I just rocked up and went to work.
Now, Ken Taylor of Yorkshire is featured on this podcast, and I understand that he was one of your coaches, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Again, a lovely fella. One of my big regrets is that I actually was at a dinner in Leeds a few years ago, a charity dinner, and a lovely painting came up of Geoffrey Boycott, who again is obviously someone I deal with a lot. And there's that classic picture of Boycott cover drive. And I thought, that's really nice. I only realised later that actually the artist was Ken Taylor. And if I'd known, I'd have bought it. Because, yes, I was at school near Norfolk, near Norwich. And my first coach was actually a woman called Eileen Ryder, whose husband was also a teacher at the school. And she was a teacher at the school. And she taught the real kids, I was 8. And so she was my first coach. She really got me into cricket after my father gave me the interest, so good old Eileen. But then when I got a little bit older, maybe 2 or 3 years later, Ken Taylor came to coach because he then had moved to Norfolk. And he was a really nice, gentle fella, a softly spoken Yorkshireman. And so, yes, he was my cricket coach for probably 2 or 3 years, I suppose, at Taverham School.
You say you want to become a fast bowler. What kind of bowler were you developing into during your teens?
Well, I always wanted to be a fast bowler, but Dad, who was an off spinner, was determined that I'd be an off spinner. And my dad was incredibly patient, really. And I think my brother's inherited that more than I have, because my brother's a teacher as well, and he coaches cricket. But my dad, because he wanted me to be an off spinner, and he had a very basic, by basic, I mean actually a very good bowling action himself, 2 or 3 paces, quite a classical, quite a tall man's off spinner's action. And so he basically taught me that. And we'd spend hours bowling at a handkerchief with a threepenny piece on it or something. And if I hit the handkerchief, I got the threepenny piece. But it was more just the rhythm of that bowling action that, although obviously I then became a fast bowler, actually it is quite a good basic action, and you can see my dad's influence as an off spinner's action, side on and quite a high left arm and a high right arm. It was based on Dad in the garden, really. By the time I was about, I suppose, 12, and so about to move schools, I was bowling fast. And already I was bowling faster than anybody else of my age group. So that's always a pretty sure sign that you've got a little bit extra. So from Taverham School, I went to Uppingham School and immediately was playing sort of 2 years above my age. So, and then I went to obviously playing village cricket as well, Ufford Park, playing against men at the age of 14, and obviously being a bit quick for them. So there was that natural pace that I had, which is strange because I was like a stick insect. I was the thinnest. Me and Neil Foster would easily qualify, I think, as the thinnest bowlers ever to play for England. We always joked amongst ourselves about who was the thinnest or who was the more muscly or whatever. But there was nothing on either of us, and it's amazing, really, looking at me and why we weren't sort of encouraged in any way or helped or programmed or processed to, go into gyms. I mean, there weren't really gyms and things like that. It just didn't happen. I don't know what impact that might have had on me, whether it been, some people talk about if you get a bit too muscle bound, actually that's not a good thing, and you lose your rhythm and your looseness. But I know I could have been fitter. My whole playing career, I was 12 stone and a quarter. Right. That never varied. It's rather more these days, unfortunately. But that's like a rake. Yeah. Really, for a fast bowler. I mean, it's extraordinary, really.
Yeah, absolutely. How did things then progress from there? Because then you had an opportunity with Surrey, didn't you?
For my 16th birthday party, I went to Alf Gover's coaching clinic in London, which was a big trip out. That was above a garage. And I had 3 days there with Alf, who was a lovely old boy. I mean, what a character. And he immediately thought, okay, we've got something here. So he contacted Surrey. And I was only 16. And so they asked me to go down in the summer holidays to go and play for them, for the second team and so on. And now that's a big deal because, a farmer's son from Lincolnshire, I don't think I've ever been to London before. And so Dad somehow, and I don't know how he did it, managed to locate Mr. and Mrs. Bushell, who they took me in as a sort of B&B arrangement in Morden on the Northern Line, so I could get on the tube, go up to the Oval, and Dad knew I wouldn't get lost, And so I went to Surrey at the age of 16 and 17, where I have to be honest, it was the most unpleasant bullying culture
Really?
that I'd ever experienced. It was a horrendous place.
In terms of the coaches or the other players?
Well, largely through the coach, who was Fred Titmus, who was a very prejudiced individual. I just hated every minute of it, if I'm honest. I know good friends of mine, Monty Lynch and people like that, had a very hard time. And so I did 2 summers of it. And I went back to school to Maurice Hallam, who's former Leicestershire captain, and he was coach at Uppingham. And I said, I'm sorry, if that's professional cricket, I don't want anything to do with it. And he said, no, it's not like that. And he said that's when he got Leicestershire involved. I was at school in Leicestershire. And so that's how I ended up playing there. No, I mean, it was whether it was the same at all the clubs at the time, I don't know, but certainly Surrey in the mid-late 70s was not a pleasant place.
And then when you arrived at Leicestershire, that was completely different, was it? It was a far more welcoming
Absolutely.
Environment?
Yeah, it was brilliant. Breath of fresh air. I mean, Ray Illingworth, go back to Bob Massey, David Gower was obviously playing there, Ken Higgs, and it was just a completely different environment. You know, they welcomed young cricketers. That was, I think, one of the issues at the Oval, was that they were these sort of gnarled old pros who saw youngsters as a threat.
Yeah, you mentioned your captain, Ray Illingworth, there, and I saw a quote that he called you the second fastest bowler in England in 1978 behind Bob Willis. I mean, when somebody of that reputation says that, are you starting to think, you believe in the hype? You think, maybe I could play for England?
Yeah, it was interesting because that was after the first game, actually. And the first match was against Lancashire, who had always been my team of heroes. I was born in Cheshire, and Peter Lever was my hero. David Lloyd, of course, these people like that who was captain. And suddenly because there's some injuries at Leicester, I was playing against them within about a month of leaving school, I suppose. So I was 18, and I bowled David Lloyd, 4th ball, and ripped his stumps out. It was all very exciting. And Illy was in the gully like he always was. And yes, he started saying all these things. And I'd just left school. I'd been at boarding school for 10 years. And so I don't know if I really believed all that or not. I mean, I got sent to Australia that winter on a Whitbread scholarship, which is a brilliant opportunity, but rather a wasted opportunity again, because there was no direction. I teamed up with Frank Tyson, which was great. I mean, he was the coach of Victoria, but he was coaching the Victorian stateside, really. So he would send me off all around Victoria, coaching in schools. But again, there's no sort of fitness program for me. There was no schedule for me to build myself up.
And on that mini kind of scholarship to Australia, you hit the England captain in the face, didn't you, Mike Brearley? Do you think that helped or hindered your progress into the England team?
Well, it didn't help my relationship with Mike, which only really got better a few years ago. It's a shame, because he and I get on like a house on fire now. But I think it rather impacted that, because again, I was 18. The nets were soaking wet, and he said he wanted to go and face some bowling in the nets, and he was captain. And I did say, you sure, Skip? Oh, come on, bowl. So I went out and bowled. I literally off about 3 paces. And the 3rd or 4th ball, a shot of a length, had struck his nose and smashed him in the eye, and really put him in jeopardy for the Test match. And there was one journalist in the ground, Rod Nicholson, from the Melbourne Herald or something like that, and he saw it. And so, of course, that suddenly became a big story, and we got flashed around everywhere. And I suspect Mike just felt a bit silly, perhaps, that he had put himself in that position and possibly knocked himself out of the Boxing Day Test. But he and I are good again now. But it was, did it help or hinder? I suppose again it kept this sort of picture of this this young fast bowler up there in people's minds, I guess. Ray Illingworth says one thing 1 minute, and then he go smash up the England captain the next.
I guess the next stage of your career, these early days, and it's something I've spoken a lot about in these podcasts. It's the seesaw nature of a cricket career. 1 minute you're the next best thing, and you're on your way to Australia for this scholarship. You're mixing with the England players. And then I've read that the following winter, you described that as one of the worst of your life. So what happened there? How did it all turn around so quickly?
I got glandular fever. I went back to Australia, got glandular fever, and that just knocked me out completely. I think the early days certainly in those days, I mean, the early years of a young fast bowler are quite a roller coaster. There's very few that make a straight line trajectory. There are injuries. I mean, it is a tough job. There were no sort of restrictions or checks or, we didn't have a physio for some of the games at Leicestershire. I mean, for professional cricket, if you compare it now, it was incredibly amateur. You'd be on the road a lot. And so inevitably you got injuries, and there was no structure in the winters at all. So you'd get your P60 in September and a reporting back date of sometime in early April. And that would be it. You'd be off and you'd have to find work. I was a lorry driver for an asbestos company that I rather regret now, delivering asbestos around the place in a very old diesel wagon thing. But actually, in the end, the steering failed and we ended up in a hedge. Right. That was the end of her. So that wasn't great. I mean, I worked in a window factory making windows. They're perfectly solid enough jobs, but because it's always so short term, no one's going to give you a sort of long-term job because they know that in April you're going to go. And that was a very unstructured time. And so the best thing to do again would be to try and get a job overseas playing. And I did get to Sydney one winter, about 83 or so, I think. And Zimbabwe. I played there as well for club cricket. Okay. So I played under Duncan Fletcher in Zimbabwe. Right. He was my captain there. And Davey Houghton, he was on the same side as me. And then at Sydney, John Benno was my captain there, so Richie's brother. That was for Cumberland, who is now called Parramatta, but way out in the west. That was how I spent those years, those winters, either filling in with a job at home or trying to get work as a professional overseas.
Yeah, and I guess then after those early years, when you're just kind of establishing your way in the team, then I guess it was 1984 when you really kind of made it, didn't you? That was a superb season when you took 84 wickets at, 28. What happened? Did everything just suddenly click into place?
Well, it did, and Andy Roberts came. I remember being rather upset about it at the time, or at least in the winter when it was announced he was coming. And I remember writing quite an angry letter to Mike Turner, who was the boss, saying, well, that's it. What am I going to do if one of the greatest fast bowlers of all time is coming? Where does that leave me? And he said, well, if you're good enough, it'll leave you bowling at the other end. And of course, he was right. Andy, I think, came in 83, and I played a few games with him. But it was, yes, in 84. Just everything clicked, really. And I started well, got in the side. I think I got sort of 8 wickets against Cambridge University at the start. And it sort of got me going. In fact, I got everyone out apart from Rob Andrew, who always reminds me. And so that just got me going, really. And then, I didn't get the choice of ends with Andy, obviously, but that didn't matter because, just bowling the other end to this legendary fast bowler, you could see, he still has a ferocious reputation that people just trying to survive and see him off. And then, if I'm honest, they'd obviously have a bit more of a dip at me, and I got better, I got wickets, and, he and I worked together well. We travelled everywhere together. He was the senior player in whose car I would travel, so we talked a lot of cricket. He was a horrendous driver. But we just talked cricket and we roomed together. And I remember driving somewhere and he said, you keep going like this, you'll play for England this summer. I said, you really think? He said, yeah, absolutely. He said, to West Indies. So they're going to get through a few players. Yeah. Keep going, So that's what happened. And he was absolutely right. And it was, I suppose in the end, they had to pick me really because they had got through quite a lot. And it was the last test of the series, which was always known as the Blackwash test. So it wasn't the most maybe the most generous of debuts because England was shot. It was a pretty broken dressing room that I went into.
Obviously, you were in superb form all season, but just to pick out one match for Leicestershire, I don't know if this made the difference, but against Surrey at the Oval, where you took 10 wickets, obviously the West Indies Test match where you played was at the Oval as well. So, but that sounded like an absolute brute of a game in terms of the injuries.
Yes. Yeah, I did always like bowling at the Oval because the ball tended to swing and it was quick and bouncy in those days. So it was a good place to bowl. If you didn't get it right, you could get a bit of tap. But the downside was that they had Sylvester Clarke. So you had to go out and face the rampant Sylvester bowling at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But I always enjoyed bowling there. And so, I remember I did get those 10 wickets there. It's interesting when you read out the stats at the start. I'm actually, of my career, I'm probably most proud of the number of 5-wicket hauls and 10s that I got because it's actually quite a high number.
It is 37, 5 wickets and 10 in a match on 6 occasions. That's going some, yeah.
Well, it is, and they not always, but they tend to win matches. I treasure those 2 stats more than anything else, really. So maybe they did look at that 10-wicket haul at the Oval, but the pitch we played on in that match was about the worst pitch you could play that West Indies team on because it was like lightning. It was an incredibly hard, quick pitch. And I remember Ian Botham got his 300th Test wicket. It was Jeff Dujon, and I was at mid-on. And Ian could bowl quickly, and he bowled this absolute brute of a ball that took off. And Jeff gloved it through to Paul Downton. I thought, what? That's a bit lively.
Yeah.
And if you look in the dressing room, there's Michael Holding and Malcolm Marshall and these blokes all, Joel Garner sitting in there. You think, oh dear. But that first Test it's strange in all sorts of ways, and it's so much better now because I hardly knew anybody. I hadn't met Ian before, Ian Botham. And he's obviously such a massive figure in that dressing room. He would just sort of lay his stuff out in the middle of the room and just sort of dominate it, And so I didn't know him. I didn't know half the side.
Was it intimidating going into that changing room?
It was. And I was talking, funny enough, to David Malan the other day. He said the first time that he played for England, he felt he had to prove himself to everybody that was there. I felt exactly the same because I didn't know them. And they're looking at me and thinking, who's this? Or you felt they were. Fortunately, David was captain, so he knew me. It was a very strange atmosphere. They were 4-0 down. I didn't know if I was going to be playing or not until the next morning. We had this rather bizarre team meeting before the game when it was already 4-0 down and everyone knew it was going to be 5-0. And, it was a rather pointless exercise. But I sat next to Alec Bedser, who spent much of the dinner talking about the potatoes he just planted in his garden. So there weren't many tips passed around about how I might bowl at Viv Richards or something, but it was all rather strange. And the selectors left. Peter May was the head selector, and they all left the room for us sort of to have some sort of tactical discussion. But there wasn't very much. It was pop guns against cannons, and said had 4 tests of being blasted, a bit like trench warfare, really. And it's only about half an hour to go, 45 minutes to go before play started, that David handed me my cap and said, there you go, you're in.
It must have been a proud moment, though. I mean, a strange atmosphere, maybe because the team are doing so badly. But, just to put things in perspective, I'm sure you were excited to play for England.
Oh, massively. I mean, it was a total dream. And we bowled first. The first couple of days were just a blur, really. I didn't get any wickets in the first innings. Richard Ellison got away early. He made his debut with me. And so he was sort of, once you get a couple of wickets or a wicket, then that's part of that big step of proving that you're capable. And so I didn't take any wickets in the first innings. Again, so those doubts are lingering a bit. And I went back to the dressing room and we batted. And actually, it was actually quite a good game. For that series, it was quite even at the end of the first inning. And we went out to field again and we got about 50 for 3 in their second innings because I got Greenwich with a ball. It just sort of happened, really. It really cut back at him. Greenwich loved the back foot and cutting. And so he slightly misjudged it, perhaps. It wasn't quite as wide as he thought, but it did come back at him and really lifted. He ended up sort of gloving a catch rather awkwardly to Botham at slip. So I'm off the mark. And then Botham said, right, as Viv Richards walked out at 3, he said, don't pitch a ball up till I tell you to. I said, okay. So we just bombed Viv for about 15 minutes. I think Ian was bowling at the other end. And we just bowled quick and short. And then he gave me a signal from slip. And I pitched one up. And Viv on the back foot, LBW, might have been a bit high.
What a moment,
Viv still claims it wasn't out. We still argue about it. But
And satisfying on so many levels there, because not only have you got Viv Richard out, but you've hatched a plan together with the linchpin, both of them, and it's all come together. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, so that all felt pretty good, I must say.
Yeah.
But blooming Desmond Haynes hadn't scored a run all series, and he chose that innings to get 100, which gave them enough, and they blew us away in the second innings. But I felt all right. It was an amazing atmosphere, the West Indian fans, the noise of the cans and the whistles and all that. I mean, it was amazing. But what was extraordinary was how little I remembered of it. I'd managed on an old fangled video machine to record the highlights. And I sat and watched them back. And it was extraordinary how little of the game I actually remembered.
And I guess the biggest rubber stamp for your performance was that you were picked in the next game against Sri Lanka. At least then you must have thought, well, look, I've done enough to earn myself a second bite here.
Yeah, that was a disastrous match.
Yeah,
it was an awful game for England because they'd come off the back of this 5-0 to playing, it was Sri Lanka's first test match in England. And Sri Lanka, up to that point, had always been a bit of an add-on, to a tour of India. And they were seen, sort of quite wrongly, but they were seen as being not second division, but not, compared to West Indies that has beaten, this was kind of like a game off. Well, that's what people thought. And again, I remember the team meeting and being a bit surprised because dear old Ian he's going to bounce them all out and end up with, I worked out about figures of sort of 10 for 20. So I thought, well, bowl Ian, bounce them out, we're going to bounce them. I thought, right, okay. So the day dawned and it was a beautiful day at Lord's, that cloud in the sky. And I remember looking and listening in horror as Gower was going around, certainly Paul Daunting. I'm trying to think if there are other Middlesex people, but I know Paul was certainly involved in the conversation about putting them in. I suppose on the back of what Ian had said the night before. I was thinking, no, he can't. Because actually, while I'd always loved bowling at the Oval, I always hated bowling at Lord's. Hated that. I don't think I ever got a wicket at Lord's. And sure enough, on this beautiful day and on this flattest pitch with a very short boundary down to the tavern, he stuck him in.
Dear.
And it was horrendous. Sit out in Wettingley, my old friend I always catch up with in Colombo, scored this sort of quite painstaking big 100. And of Ian's bouncers, I remember sort of a steward being dispatched to the mound stand just to throw the ball back all the time.
Yeah.
He kept bouncing Dilip Mendes, who just kept smashing him for six. And it was just horrendous. And there's bad light on the second day. But Dickie was umpiring. I said, Dickie, what about the light? He said, I've offered it to them, but they don't want it. They just kept batting. And Ian went off injured. Paul Allott went off injured. And the only bowlers that were left, I think it was about me and Pat Pocock. Took a third new ball. Alan Lamb dropped a catch off me at slip. I got Arjuna Ranatunga. Actually, again, it was quite a nice ball. This went down the slope. It was just a bail trimmer, really. I remember looked at someone played it the other day. It was not a happy celebration because they were just, they've got so many on the board. And then poor old Aravinda de Silva came out. It's his first test. And it'll say in Wisden, caught Downton, bowled Agnew. He might even have got naught, but he didn't get very many. In fact, it was a horrible steal down the leg side. I kept going, but the others went off. But I remember the second innings, the television volume was up in our dressing room. And as we walked out to take the field in a pointless situation, because the match was drawn, I remember Richie Benno agreeing with, I think, Peter West that, yes, this is obviously a very important spell here for Jonathan Agnew as far as the winter's concerned. And I thought, oh, God. And I bowled a load of no balls and, it just didn't go well. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't hey, I'm the man to take to India.
Yeah, well, that's the next thing I was going to ask about India, because you'd think that they'd put faith in a young fast bowler who, okay, that wasn't a great game for anyone, was it? Sri Lanka.
Terrible.
What were you thinking? Were you expected to get the call up?
Well, I thought I might, but what they did, but both of them wasn't available either, so he didn't go. But they picked all the ones who had played earlier. So Norman Cowans, Neil Foster, Paul Allott had gone off injured in the test match. They all got the nod. Richard Ellison went. He deserved to. He actually bowled pretty well, though he went off injured, I think, against Sri Lanka as well. So they got the nod, and I ended up, that was the year, actually, the winter, I ended up working in the window factory. So I was on official standby as a replacement, which didn't mean very much. I mean, there were no nets or anything. So I was there working in Ratby in Leicestershire, making windows, when suddenly a phone call happened, and I was told to report to Lord's because I'd be going to India.
Incredible.
And because Paul Allott was injured. So, I mean, I'd done nothing. I wasn't paid or anything, so I had to work. So I'm working 9 to 5 in the window factory. But then next minute, it's down to Lord's. I think I was given some England sweaters. I didn't get a blazer, but I got some England sweaters. I mean, I just looked like the replacement. I got to India, and there's Pat Pocock again, actually. He kept popping up, Pat, but he had been assigned the duty of meeting me at Calcutta Airport. So whereas the team was in Guwahati playing a game, he came and met me. And so he looked after me. We had 3 or 4 days, I suppose, there together. And we'd go and find somewhere to run. Went down to the golf course at Tollygunge and do a bit of training. But yeah, there's nowhere to bowl.
And that was Christmas time, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Christmas. So
Christmas with Pat Pocock.
Yes. Oh, well, no, the team arrived in time for Christmas because the test started in Calcutta on Boxing Day, I assume. I remember being sort of 12th man, there was 1-1. They'd won the second test in Delhi, and Richard Ellison had bowled really well there in the sort of gloom and the smog, and had swung the ball around. And so morale was quite high, actually, and whereas in India, it wasn't. And Gavaskar and Capel Devon had a fallout. And I just sort of watched, really. It was a happy tour. I was rooming with Graham Fowler, who's a good mate. And so that sort of got me settled into things. I just was sort of 12th man, really, and learnt the ropes of what it was like. The food that the team had taken were like, so lunchtime in the test match, there was Govind, who was the baggage manager, and his two sons. And they would literally take all the team baggage on the trains between matches, but they also were the chefs. And so lunch was literally sort of spam and beans on toast, cooked in the dressing room. It was bizarre. Yeah, but I'd carry the drinks. Calcutta Test was an incredibly boring game. And Alan Lamb got his test wicket, I remember that, doing a Bob Willis impersonation. He got Prabhakar LBW. But I got slowly into the tour and I was able to bowl.
You got a game, didn't you? You got a couple of games, yeah.
Well, I got a game in Hyderabad. So the next game we went down to Hyderabad on the way to Madras for the test. I actually got 5 for something like 20 overs, 5 for 100 because I was so rusty, and it was quite a green pitch. And Chris Srikanth was playing for them, who was a murderous opening batsman, and he smashed me all over the place. And I got 5 wickets at the same time. Some of the press boys again got interested because suddenly I'm back on the radar. But I didn't make it for the Madras test, which is a good thing because Neil Foster did and he bowled them out.
How did you cope with the heat and the humidity and all that?
Well, I just got through it. I was keen and I was 24. It was just nice to be playing, to be honest. Yeah. Because what did happen, I didn't play in the 4th or 5th test, but I did play in a couple of the one-day internationals. The first one was in Nagpur. That's when my one-day international debut. I bowled Sonny Gavaskar. Vengsarkar, Prabhakar. I think I got 3 for 30, something like that. And so again, I think we might have lost the game, but I did all right.
What I hadn't realised after that superb series victory was that it was all off to Australia for the rather grandly named Benson and Hedges World Championship of Cricket.
Yeah, well, that's the madness. That tour was just interminable, and they'd worked so hard and won that series in very difficult conditions, and then just got flown to Melbourne. It was the first day-nighter ever played at the MCG. So it was a massive occasion.
That must have been a career highlight because you played in that game, didn't you?
Yeah, but also bowled like a complete idiot. And again, I wasn't expecting to play. And what happened was we arrived in Melbourne and Gower said, right, I don't expect to see any of you for 10 days. Go and enjoy yourselves. So I thought, oh, okay. In fact, I think we landed in Sydney to start with. So we landed in Sydney and everyone has disappeared. Went out a good time. We had 3.5, 4 months in India. And so we reconvened, but the focus had gone. I don't think our players really wanted to go. They'd given it everything in India, everything. To come from behind and win there was a fantastic achievement. And then suddenly it sort of let loose in a sweet shop. So we went to Melbourne and I wasn't expecting to play. And I remember, because it was a day-nighter, we had one practice under floodlights at the MCG. And I'd never been under lights before. And it was just incredible. Incredibly different. It was also a totally deserted MCG, no one in it. And David came up to me, Gower, and said, yeah, you better get used to this because you're playing tomorrow. And he threw me a white ball. And then, of course, we were given these sort of powder blue clothes to try on. And that was it. That was a sort of introduction to day-night cricket. I remember thinking, oh, this is strange. We bowled with a white ball that day before for the first time in my case. Woke up next morning, we're staying at the hotel that overlooks the MCG. I remember opening the curtains and thinking, my God, because although it was a day-nighter, there were just thousands of people there waiting. There were 90-something thousand in the ground that day. It was incredible. We had to do a lap of the outfield, so waving to the crowd to say hello, everyone. And you can imagine the abuse. It was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. And we got back in the dressing room. I thought, what was that all about? And we batted first. And I sat down in the bottom. They had some 2 layers in the dressing room at the MCG. And I was downstairs with Chris Cowdrey. We were watching it on the telly. And all you could hear from upstairs was when the door opened to go out, a new batsman, this sort of roaring of noise would come through. And then the door would close and it'd be silence again. And so we're sitting watching the game and Chris decided it's time for him to put his pads on, and a wicket falls. He said, oh, I'm in. So off he went. He heard the and the silence as he went out. And I watched him on the telly walking all the way out into the middle. He took guard, looked round. He got a first baller and he had to walk all the way back. First ball. And I heard the door closed. And he came back down and sat beside me. We just looked at each other and sort of shrugged our shoulders, you know. But I got into bat, and I remember Jeff Lawson bowling for the southern end, which is the noisy end. And I was batting Richard Ellison, whose eyes were like golf balls. And I mean, he couldn't really talk. He couldn't hear anything, apart from the crowd roaring. I mean, they'd waited all these years in Melbourne for day-night cricket. It was incredible.
What are you thinking at that point? This is terrific, or this is miserable, or this is intimidating?
Well, it was kind of a bit of both, really. You know, totally underprepared.
Yeah.
For that. It just all felt surreal. As Alan Border there and dear old Dean Jones, and, you know, it was just weird. Jeff Lawson having a go, a crowd noise. We didn't get enough runs. And I came on first change, and they'd already got a bit of a start, but I didn't bowl very well. And so I honestly thought that was probably the end of my international career, really. You know, I have to make assessments now, you know, very quickly of young cricketers when they come in. You know, are they good enough? You know, people always want to know too quickly if someone's good enough or not. But you can tell those who are. You know, it's like Stokes or Sam Curran or these people. They just got that character about them. Though they just walk in and you know that they're going to be good enough. Whereas it was always that extra step for me that was a bit too far.
That's somewhat where we are, because obviously we're about to get into the Ashes summer, but you've been making windows. You've suddenly been transported to India, then you've been thrown into the Lion's Den at the MCG.
It was a bit of a swirl, but I think I was realistic enough to think that I probably wasn't going to play anymore.
So you weren't targeting the Ashes when you came back?
No, I wasn't at all, really.
Really?
I mean, no. And it's funny because my playing career was in two halves, really, in that the first half, including when I played for England, I was a fast bowler. But the second half, I cut the run down. I still bowled at a nippy pace, but I swung the ball, bowled long spells, had a good bouncer, but was a much better bowler. And that was when I didn't play for England. So that I think, if I'm honest, was probably where I was. I mean, the bulk of my wickets I took from 1986, because by that point, yes, we're leading up to that Ashes Test match that I played in. I knew that was the end. And it all happened because, I didn't target the Ashes at all.
Well, you played against the Aussies in June for Leicestershire, didn't you?
Yes.
And you had a pretty decent match.
Did I? I can't remember.
Well, I mean, you got 19 with the bat as well. But you got 3 wickets. You got Kepler, Vessels, Boone, and Bob Holland.
Right. Okay. I remember Kepler, actually. I got in quite cheaply, I think, LBW. We did a bodyline reenactment for a bit of a laugh.
Did you?
The bodyline was being shown on the telly. And so Gower, being Gower, clapped his hands twice and said, right, that's it, everyone in position. So we did a bodyline field. But of course, it was called a no ball. I bowled a bouncer, whoever it was. We had a bit of a laugh. And we reenacted the bodyline thing. But yeah, okay, so that's interesting. I hadn't realised I got a few wickets. But I mean, the match that did it was Kent. The match before the Old Trafford Test match, we're playing Kent at Grace Road. And this is a really bizarre game because I got 9 for 70. But I was off the field for some of the time. I had a niggle. So I had to keep sort of coming off and get strapped up and then had to serve time where you couldn't bowl again. So it wasn't as though I sort of ran through them with 9 for. But I did happen to take the first 9 wickets. And out came Kevin Jarvis, who was comfortably the worst number 11 on the circuit at the time. And I'm bowling at Kevin Jarvis to get all 10. I couldn't get him out. And so I had a whole over at him. I think he shouldered arms twice. And then he got a single or something. And he got down the other end. And Paddy Clifton in the end just had to get him out. He bowled a straight ball and bowled him.
I think when he first came in, you were on a hat trick. So it would have been a hat trick.
Oh, was I?
And all 10.
Right. Well, there you go.
Right.
So that would have been even more special, wouldn't it?
It's interesting, actually, this series, because the previous guest on this podcast was Arnie Sidebottom, who played in the Test before you. And I spoke to him, and he was completely surprised that he was picked for that game because he said he was struggling with injuries.
Right. Yeah. So I jumped ahead again. Yes, correct. So I was actually selected in the 12 for Trent Bridge. You're right. Arnie's picked, and he had a bad toe. I remember him saying to me the day before the game, Agus, I know I'm not properly fit, but it'll be my only chance, and I'm going to bloody well play. I thought, okay, that's interesting. Because he had his toe was a real mess. And so sure enough, he played, didn't make it through the game. So that's why he was a one-test wonder. But he got his cap, which was really what he wanted. And I had to do quite a lot of fielding for him.
Did you think that was a bit bizarre? David Gower is your county captain as well as the England captain, and he's picking an injured player ahead of you. Did you think that was a bit strange?
Well, I think Arnie has kept it quiet. I mean, I didn't know until he told me that afternoon, the day before the game, that he had he had an injury, and so he just didn't tell anybody. And he was a tough old so-and-so. So he got through that first innings. He couldn't make it through the second.
He also said it was a complete road, that the Trent
No, it was.
Bridge.
Except the next one then. So, yes, I play at Old Trafford. It was a horrible game. There was a howling wind blowing straight down the ground that I had to bowl into because Ian got the choice of ends, obviously. And I remember just trying to flog into this gale on a pretty flat pitch. And there was a lot of rain around as well. And I didn't get any wickets. And it was a nightmare of a game. I remember Simon O'Donnell, who I'd played with in Melbourne, smashing me for 6 over mid-wicket. And I thought, this is horrible. Craig McDermott got 8 wickets, I think, from memory, bowling with the wind behind him. It was a very tedious draw. I think I got one spell downwind. The rest of it, I was just flogging into this gale. It was significant because there were 3 Cheshire-born bowlers playing for England, me, Ian and Paul Allard. Other than that, it was a pretty insignificant game, and that was the end.
Do you curse your luck that you were involved? You know, your first one was against the West Indies when they were already 4-0 up. The one Ashes test you play is, you know, in terrible conditions. Yeah. It's about when you get your chances.
It is, and I might have had more luck the 3 tests that I played. But in those days, I mean, that's why I felt, you know, sorry for Arnie. The rotation, I mean, it wasn't rotation, it was just like a revolving door. I mean, you were just in and out. If you didn't perform immediately, you were out. There was more competition. I mean, I think amongst the bowlers, there was a lot of high-quality English fast bowling around in those days. I mean, a lot. It was a good thing in some ways because in county cricket, you knew that if you performed well one week, you might be playing for England the next. It was a great motivator.
But to draw the comparison with Arnie again, he was nearing the end of his career. You were only 25, so you surely didn't think that was going to be your last game for England.
Well, I think I did probably, yes. And so that's why the following year, we were playing against Somerset and I had a bit of a side strain. Not as serious, but it was one of those, and you don't mess around with side strains. But it was there as a bit of a niggle. And Peter Willey was captain because David was obviously away playing for England. And Peter said, I want you to play. I said, well, he said, I want you to play. You just got to be a wimp. You're a wimp. You play. I said, okay, I'll play, but I'm going to shorten my run and try and get through. There must be some other injuries. And it was one of those days at Grace Road where the breeze was perfect. It was coming to the southwest. I bowled up the hill. Tazo came off a short run and the ball swung around all over the place. I got 6 wickets, including Martin Crowe. And all Peter Willey did was sort of fume in the gully because coming in, I was with virtually no effort, I got 6 for. And that was why I changed. Because when I was fitter, when my side strain had gone, I could bowl not as quick as I used to bowl, but it was a more controlled pace. And I knew I could swing it. And so that was sort of Agnew Mark II.
I mean, 87 was staggering. I mean, 101 wickets for Leicestershire, and you were one of the 5 Wisden cricketers of the year.
Well, just hard work, luck. I don't think I missed a game, bowled a lot of overs, and bowled well. And the following year too. And that's when I should have been playing for England. But my time had gone, and that's fair enough. I accept that. But I was quite cross with Mickey Stewart. I remember one of the selectors. He was always the one who had to phone me up still when I hadn't been picked, which he did every now and then, to be fair to him. And I used to give him a blast. I said, what more have I got to do? You know, between tests, I remember taking 10 for against Gloucestershire at Gloucester. And it was a day of a selection meeting, I think. And I remember listening to the radio on the way driving back. And again, I hadn't made it. And I just got a bit angry about it. I just felt that I was being judged on the previous bowler when I was a different bowler in those days. But hey, you know, I did get picked again. In 1989, it was a farce because it was coming up to the last test of the series. And David was captain again. We were playing, I think it was Surrey at Grace Road. The side had been picked. And then again, there was a whole list of fast bowlers who'd been picked and I hadn't been picked. But one by one, they kept phoning the Grace Road dressing room to speak to David. They were all dropping out through injury. And I mean, you know, they all did. There were just scores of them all phoning up. In the end, Davis put the phone down and he just sat in his chair and was thinking, and he says, what am I going to do? Who am I going to pick? And Peter Willey said, well, what about Aggers? He's doing all right. You know, he's taking a few wickets. And David said, yes, gosh, of course. He said, right, yeah, you're in. I thought, oh, thanks very much. That's great. That's good news. The moment I'd waited for. Again, it was the last test of a series and we were losing. I didn't care. And I went. David said, "Look, I've got to run it past Ted Dexter and Mickey Stewart in the morning. So I'll give you a buzz first thing just to confirm it, but you're in." I said, "Great." So I went home, phoned my dad, got my kit out, my England sweaters. Fantastic. The next day came and David rang. He said, "I'm sorry, you're not in anymore. I couldn't convince Mickey Stewart and Ted Dexter. They've selected Alan Eggleston." So that was that. And that was when I knew my career was over.
I've read about that, and you've recounted it in the same way. You've got every right to feel extremely aggrieved by that.
Well, but what it did, though, it did focus my mind on the future. So, I mean, I knew I was 29, I was not going to play for England. So I'd been working at Radio Leicester. I'd got into broadcasting in the winters. I'd been working for the Today newspaper. And so I focused in my mind then on moving on. I had one more year at Leicester, and it was the year in which they did those dreadful things to the balls, gave them no seams whatsoever, and teams are rattling up to 900. So that was my last season, because today offered me the job as cricket correspondent to go to Australia that winter.
Yeah, if we keep this as well on a Ashes front, you could have played that test match in '89 for all the money it looked like you were going to play. You could have reasonably hoped that you might have been a player on that tour, and yet there you were as one of the Beastie Boys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that focused the mind, not being picked, and the circumstances around it, because Dexter and Mickey were going to be around for a while, so they weren't going to pick me. And once you have played, well, I found anyway, you need to feel that you can play again. It's that motivating focus that you want to play again. And so once you know that's not going to happen, do I really want to go and stand at fine leg at Grace Road for another 5-6 years? So that was why it did focus onto the writing. And during that Ashes tour, writing for Today, it was when Chris Martin Jenkins left the BBC to go to the Telegraph. So the BBC job came available, which I applied for and got.
We're talking about the ill timing of some of your test matches. The opposite was certainly true of that opportunity, wasn't it?
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, total luck. Yeah, in a way, it sort of reflects. I think people forget that I think it's quite interesting talking to you, going through my playing, because I think most people don't know that I used to play. I don't talk about it very much. I just talk about the broadcasting side of it. So, that was a complete change of fortune and opened the door to a second career that I've probably felt more comfortable in than my first, really.
Now you've spent far more time being a commentator than you were a player, haven't you? And being a
absolutely, it's sort of double the time. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's just something that I was able to do, and it's there's more to it than people might imagine. Obviously, much more work to it and so on, but essentially, it was quite an easy progression.
What has been better, playing or commentating?
That's a really difficult question. I mean, I think, if I'm honest, I think commentating, because I've been lucky enough to commentate on events that I would love to have been involved in as a player. England winning the Ashes and World Cups and stuff.
One question I ask everyone on this podcast is, what did it mean to you to play in the Ashes? But I think there's a secondary question to you as well. And what does it mean to describe an Ashes winning moment?
Yeah, I mean, because my Ashes experience was so low key. I mean, that's the only way of putting it, really. I mean, it was such a low key game, cold, wet, windy, and horrible. The Ashes never really caught fire for me, if you like. You want to put it in sort of a corny way. I was 12th man for the next two, so Richard bowling him out at Edgbaston, and then my roommate Les Taylor actually took the last Ashes wicket at the Oval when I was 12th man. I was really thrilled for him. He's a great fella. So my actual Ashes experience, although I was an Ashes winner officially, because we won that series, and my contribution was 0 for 100 and about 3 runs or something. So, winning. One of the great highlights of commentating for me was certainly winning the Ashes in Melbourne in 2010-11. That was a magical moment. So rarely done. My wife was there, and I got her in the ground, and I'd also got a spare pass, and I stuck it round her neck and dragged her out into the middle as the match was over, and interviewing all the players, captains, and savouring the atmosphere, because I was able to say, this is why I do this totally selfish job. And so she was out there with me, Cook and Swan and all the rest of them, the sprinkler going on. And so that was special. That's probably been my happiest moment.
And that's where we'll leave Jonathan Agnew on the pitch at the MCG in 2010 at the end of the Boxing Day Test, soaking up the atmosphere in one of the great cricketing stadiums in the world. Huge thanks to Jonathan for coming on the show and sharing the story of his cricketing life. It's been an honour and a pleasure. This has been a very English-centric series so far in terms of our One Ashes Test Wonders, but we're going to correct that in the next 2 episodes when we'll hear from Murray Bennett and Dave Gilbert, who both played in the 6th and final test of the series at the Oval. I'd love for you to join me. Until then, I've been Graham Barrett, and this has been Once Upon a Time in the Ashes.